Hello to everyone. My name is Chyk, Doctor of Philological Sciences and Comparative Literature, Professor at the Department of Foreign Languages and Their Teaching Methods, Shevchenko Regional Humanitarian Pedagogical Academy of Kremenets, Ukraine. Before starting my report about the similarities and differences between the novels of the Polish writer Stanisław Lem and the Ukrainian writers of the Soviet era, I would like to say a few words about the main hero of my report, Stanisław Lem's novels and the Ukrainian science fiction literature of the Soviet times, representation of trauma, memory, and resistance to totalitarianism. Stanisław Lem is a Polish writer, philosopher, futurist, and one of the most famous science fiction authors of the 20th century. His works have been translated into dozens of languages and influenced the development of not only literature, but also cinema, philosophy, and scientific thought. Stanisław Lem remains one of the most important figures in world literature, and his works continue to inspire readers and thinkers around the world. Stanisław Lem was born in Lviv, which at the time was part of the Republic of Poland. After high school, he began to study medicine at a local institute, but due to the beginning of the Second World War, he was forced to interrupt his studies. In the post-war years, he and his parents moved to Kraków, where he continued his studies at the Jagiellonian University and began writing, gradually focusing on science fiction. In 1951, he published his first novel, The Astronauts, which launched his successful career in the science fiction genre. However, such works as Eden, Solaris, The Invincible, The Futurological Congress brought real fame to Stanisław Lem. All literary critics have noted that Lem was not only a writer but also a philosopher. He often pondered both in his works of art and in his essays about the future of humanity, the development of technology, and its impact on society. His works combine scientific knowledge, philosophical ideas, and literary talent, which make his books relevant even today. However, I would like to focus on those grounds that allow us to claim that this writer was, to some extent, a political thinker who deeply reflected on the nature of dictatorship. In the same context as the work of Stanisław Lem, primarily his novels Eden, published in 1959, and Return from the Stars, published in 1961, I would like to consider the novels of two Ukrainian writers of the Soviet era who also worked in the science fiction genre, the novels of Volodymyr Blatko, The Grey Captain, and Oles Bernik, The Star Corsair. Eden by Stanisław Lem is one of the author's deepest and, it is believed, most mysterious novel, which explores the themes of communication, information theory, and the nature of dictatorship. The plot of the novel revolves around a group of astronauts who make an emergency landing on a planet that, for its beauty, is named Eden. The name is sarcastic because, as it turns out later, the outer, heavenly beauty of the planet is opposed to the hellish conditions in which its inhabitants exist. The crew consists of 6 people: coordinator, engineer, chemist, doctor, physicist, and cybernetists, who are rather generalized figures of specialists from certain fields. After the crash of their spaceship, they begin to explore an unfamiliar planet, where they immediately encounter strange life forms. The astronauts gradually realize that the local society is extremely complex and has probably experienced some kind of catastrophe or mass violence at some point. However, the main problem for them is their inability to understand residents their actions and motives. The slow exploration of the planet during repeated expeditions outside the spaceship revealed to the astronauts a complex social system for human understanding. As a result, in many discussions, astronauts attempt to understand the functioning of communities on the planet, applying their knowledge of history, philosophy, religion, and sociology. The first thing they encounter is a giant factory, which is complete mystery because it works autonomously and according to the principle of a closed circuit, which eventually lends itself to the solution of doctor. Now it's woman inside up. See. And now they are melting, fusing, being carried to the top in potion, where they are treated. Then, still red hot, they drop to the bottom underground. There must be another level there, and something else happens to them, and they come back up by the sun, well, pale but still glowing. They journey up to the ceiling, fall into this, indicated the funnel, and from there go into the trough, then the snout, melt, and so on, forming, melting, forming. Economist Adam Smith distinguished two forms of labor: praxis, unproductive, and posis, productive. Labor, through fixation in the product, thus become a quantitative value that has a specific value. The synthesis of these two forms in a mysterious factory, in which the usual production cycles are probably disrupted, completely stuns the astronauts, who see here an upset, self-destruction of the scheme they know. However, later they understand that such factories produce doublers, inhabitants of the planet, whose body structure is organized according to the principle of symbiosis between two bodies. As the astronauts found out, some time ago, the authorities on the planet decided to conduct an experiment on the genetic improvement of doublers, which turned out to be unsuccessful. About 50 years ago, a plan of biological reconstruction was inaugurated among them. The remodeling of bodily functions and forms. It's a confusing story. Virtually the entire population of the planet underwent a series of surgical procedures. But this apparently was not so much a matter of changing the present generation's future ones through the engineered mutation of hereditary material. As it turns out, high technologies cannot ensure the high quality and accurate production of doublers, which at a certain stage are incapable of external control and adjustment. High technologies, which the power structures recklessly bet on, led to unpredictable results. 5 years later, Stanisław Lem will repeat this episode of the novel already in the form of an assumption in his collection of futurological essays, Sama Technologia, where he emphasizes that modern science must remember the responsibility for the lottery it plays. Therefore, the authorities prefer not to see their miscalculations and hide the catastrophic consequences of the terrifying experiment from the planet's inhabitants. Wojciech Orliński, in his fundamental biography of Stanisław Lem, gives an apt explanation of why the authors of Eden so often refused to talk about this particular text in interviews. According to the biographer, Stanisław Lem did not have to invent anything, and he simply describes his traumatic memories of the period of living in Lviv in 1941. Stanisław Lem became a direct eyewitness of the tragic events of June, such as July 2nd, 1941, which later became known as the Lviv pogrom. The pogrom of Jewish population of Western Ukraine in the city of Lviv, which was organized by the Nazi occupation authorities, but in which, unfortunately, residents also participated. I will not go into the details of the reasons for this tragic page in the common Ukrainian, Polish, and Jewish history. I will only note that controversy continues regarding the degree of participation of Ukrainians in this pogrom, but the fact remains unequivocal that the new occupation authorities skillfully extrapolated the anger of residents against the Soviet security agencies, and which, retreating from Lviv in June, killed many imprisoned Ukrainians and Poles, to the defenseless civilian Jewish population. Therefore, the descriptions of the cleaning of the premises after the massacre in the novel, as well as the genocide of the planet's power against its population, Lem's memories of the events of the Lviv pogrom or later bloody events related to the Yanovska Nazi concentration camp. Indeed, the novel quite clearly describes the attempt of the planet's authorities to hide the failed genetic experiments. In particular, the author provides a detailed description of a mob with doubless corpses who were destroyed only because of their defectiveness and so-called defectiveness. The waxy heap along the edge of the ditch at first appeared to be a homogeneous mass. The man could barely breathe, the stench was so bad. Then they began to distinguish separate figures. Some creatures lay with their humps upward, others on their side. Frail torsos with small upturned faces were wedged between huge muscles, and massive trunks lay intermingled with tiny hands, knotty fingers that dangled limply. The swollen bodies were covered with damp yellow patches. The doctor gripped the man on either side of him so tightly that they would have cried out had they been aware of him. The ditch was big. Thick drops of fluid, glistening in the sunlight, trickled down waxy backs and sides and collected in the sunken, eyeless faces. The man thought they could hear the sound of dripping. In addition to this rather frightening find, the astronauts also have to come across a ghetto for inferior doublers who perform grueling work that is probably not productive and is intended as a kind of punishment, which in turn promotes the unity of stigmatized community. With the help of psychological manipulation by anonymous authorities, the social groups of such doublers self-isolate, close on their social ties, and function according to the principle of symbiotic organisms. Here, one can also trace an allusion to the Lviv ghetto, Ghetto Lemberg. According to Holocaust researchers, the Lviv ghetto was the third largest in Eastern Europe, through which more than 138,000 Jews passed. For comparison, according to various sources, only up to 300 people survived the Holocaust in Lviv. Therefore, the emphasis on the images of the panopticon, the ghetto, sudden death, and its manifestations is of course a traumatic memory of the young writer who managed to survive with his parents in times of adversity, unlike his numerous Lviv family members. Accordingly, the novel Eden is an autobiographical novel that both describes the totalitarian society of the socialist camp and also a memoir about the Holocaust. Hiding the miscalculations of the totalitarian element in Lamb's novel is similar to that described by the Ukrainian writer Oles Bernik in the novel The Star Corsair. The novel The Star Corsair is one of the most iconic fantasy novels by Oles Bernik, which was written in 1971. This is a philosophical fantasy saga that combines the ideas of humanism, the search for a higher meaning of being, and the role of man in the space. The novel also contains elements of the fight against tyranny and criticism of technological progress, which does not necessarily bring spiritual development and leads to dictatorship. At the same time of writing the novel, Oles Bernik already had the traumatic experience of being a political prisoner in Stalin's concentration camps, where he was first sent in 1950, where his prison term was later extended. The resistance to dictatorship in the novel The Star Corsair is also an autobiographical element, because Oles Bernik made at least 2 attempts to escape from the concentration camp. Already after the publication of The Star Corsair, he became a co-founder of Ukrainian Helsinki group, which was in opposition to the Soviet government and whose influence in the late 1980s can be compared with the Polish independent self-governing trade union Solidarity. The plot of The Star Corsair by Oles Bernik is complex. It has several storylines that are separated at certain stage and brought together. The novel describes several civilizations of the future, including the air civilization, which is exclusively described in the Ukrainian context, the civilization of the planet Aorta, and the Arab planetary system. In the past, the civilization of the planet Aorta was technologically advanced enough, but it became a victim of a scientific theory. Scientists created the so-called central synthesizer, which provides the inhabitants of the planet with food and everything they need. As the last thinking resident of Aorta, Ishwari, notes that after the invention of the synthesizer, they need to create disappeared, which in turn led to the mental degradation of the population. Scientists discovered the secret of the green leaf and the synthesis of substances. Agriculture and gardening became unnecessary. Numerous machines have replaced the work of people. Automatic lines brings millions of consumers everything they need for a functional life. The creators of the synthesizer thought that they would free people for cosmic creativity, but they were terribly mistaken. The human mind was hardened in the struggle against the elements, in the harmonization of its being with the forces of the cosmos, in the stimulus to action. The creators of our civilization took those incentives away from people. The revolution has begun. Most people can't talk anymore. They don't want to learn. They want only one thing: pleasure, mindless observation, spontaneous reproduction, plant life. From now on, Aorta truly lives up to her name, the Great Feeder, but is now a trap for her inhabitants, who have been transformed into plant appendages for the central synthesizer. The synthesizer now acts as a technical controller of the planet, who has subjugated the inhabitants by assimilating them to animals, and who now lead a classical communist way of life. They are equal, no forms of oppression or state apparatus, no wars. They do what they are interested in. It is only rest or reproduce, and they get the amount of consumption items they need when necessary. The central synthesizer embodies an important function of the communist system because it takes all the inhabitants of the planet beyond the production of the material world, and in practice embodies this key idea of Karl Marx. So, before us, a sophisticated parody of Karl Marx's interpretation of the great industry as a monster, compared to the anonymous monster from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein novel, which exhausts the workers and which sucks blood from its victims, like the main character of the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. The central synthesizer offers absolutely everything to the planet's inhabitants, taking no resources from them in return, but instead binding them tightly to itself as a sole source of sustenance for their vegetative existence. So the achievement of a communist paradise, where everyone will receive goods according to their needs, leads to the actual control of consumers. However, Olесь Bernik, like Stanisław Lem, does not provide a solution to save the planet's inhabitants who have failed in their evolutionary development. As in the novel Eden, the mission of Aslins in the Ukrainian writer's novel, despite their intentions to help the local inhabitants, leave the planet. So it can be assumed that both science fiction writers were rather pessimistic about the potential possibilities of evolution. The next great text after Eden by Stanisław Lem was the novel Return from the Stars, where the main theme is also the construction of a utopian society. Like the planet Aoda from the star Corsair, the Earth of the future has entered a new evolutionary stage called the New Age of Humanism. At this stage, people are improved on the medical level, and on the technological level, all people are freed from physical labor, even the smallest. The improvement of people through the so-called batterization, a kind of inoculation in childhood, destroys aggressiveness in people, and as a result, leads to the disappearance of crime and wars. But along these positive changes, it makes impossible those types of activities that are connected with risk and danger. For example, sports races are performed exclusively by automated machines, and competitive sports have been gradually eliminated due to the avoidance of potential injuries. Having overcome resistance in individual countries, remarkable changes are being achieved in the world, radically revising culture and history and introducing a taboo on discussing the negative effect of miraculous vaccination. With the change of generation, a complete change in the culture of society is achieved. The baptized young growing up rejected a considerable part of humanity's achievement, and customs, traditions, art, the entire cultural heritage underwent a radical re-evolution. The change included a large number of areas: sexuality, social mores, the attitude toward war. Young people, better sated, became strangers to their own parents, whose interests they did not share. They abhorred their parents' bloody tastes. And again, the main character of Return from the Stars, the middle-aged astronaut Hal Breck, who physically belongs to another era, has experienced a significant culture shock after returning from a long expedition. And he does not try to change society, and after some hesitation decides to become a part of it, voluntarily agreeing to accept the rules of a new social contract for him. Here too, there is a parodic version of a communist society where everyone is equal, independent of the need to work, and also systematically got rid of various bourgeois conventions such as loan marriage or elementary shame. People's supervision of another automated part of society has reduced to the formalities of controlling their assistants, robots. In the end, I learned that for the past 50 years, so there had existed a total separation between work and life. All production was automated and took place under supervision of robots, which were overseen by other robots. There was no longer any place in this realm for people. Society led its own life, and the robots and automata theirs. Except that, to prevent unforeseen aberrations in the established order of this mechanical army of labor, periodic inspections were necessary and they were carried out by specialists. Similar to the scenes of genocide in Stanisław Lem's previous novel, the main character of Return from the Stars encounters a similar one when he stumbles upon a kind of graveyard warehouse with mutilated robots begging for help, giving the impression of sentient beings. According to the rules, the sorting of robots and their subsequent processing in the open hearth furnace is carried out by other workers, but Halbrecht is worried about whether even perfectly serviceable machines, which by chance ended up in the landfill, could be doomed to destruction. What worries him is the complete self-removal of humans from this process, which contrasts with his sense of empathy for the doomed robots and the now unknown humans, the sense of horror at sudden death or the threat of destruction. If Stanisław Lem's allusions to the Holocaust experienced by him can be read only by knowing the specific biographical context, then in the novel The Star Corsair by Oles Badnik, the allusion to the totalitarian society of the Soviet Union with one ruler, the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, is more than obvious. At the time of writing the novel, the full title of the post of General Secretary was included in the official political lexicon of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union since 1966, and it is obvious that it corresponds to the position of the villain Ahriman in the novel by Badnik, the chief coordinator. According to the plot of the novel, in the Ara planetary system, the name of which is also sarcastic, because it does not demonstrate the unity it denotes. There is also a society that is governed in a totalitarian way because power belongs to one person. Humanity has long passed the periods of planetary evolution. Now the scheme of the central system looked like this. Giant spheres spirals, satellites revolved around the star, which completely took away its energy for the needs of the population and lush vegetation. On the main spiral was located the coordination center, which managed the life of the Ara system. There were scientists, cosmonauts, and cosmocrators. Damages of new worlds. They were headed by Ahriman, the chief coordinator. As in Lamb's novel, a new round of evolution made it possible to solve the problem of death. From now on, the government is concerned with ensuring that no one dies and tries to achieve this with the help of total and permanent control. However, unexpectedly, for the coordination center, the main authority, the similarly achieved paradise has its significant drawbacks. Suicides are becoming more frequent among the residents of the system, to which the authorities react quite harshly and actually deny the right to die, forcing offenders to continue living against their will. The coordination center decided to punish the suicides more severely, to bring them back to life, but to lock them for a very long time in an individual gravitational shell, from where they could see and hear everything, but where they could neither move nor act. Such inviolability, such death for life was supposed to arouse interest in conscious existence, according to the idea of the cosmologists. Also, the inhabitants of the planet show indifference to work and entertainment, and there is a degradation of thinking and a complete loss of interest in life, especially among young people. Oles Bernik even describes in detail the limitless possibilities that the planet is beginning to possess. Cosmocrators create new suns and systems and travel to other galaxies. Our scientists knew how to create new evolutions, synthesize life, model the processes of thinking and creativity, predict events, and stop them. Until now, unheard of technologies, including the synthesis of new life mentioned in Lamb's novel, did not allow the inhabitants of the planet to experience the taste of immortal life. In contrast to the novels of Stanisław Lem, Oles Bernik introduces into the novel an element of successful resistance to the totalitarian regime, which ends with the victory of the rebels, led by Horia, who operates under the pseudonym Star Corsair. Interestingly, the first rebels in our are children who have not been corrupted by propaganda and who long for genuine freedom. Children who begin to openly oppose the authorities are no longer attracted by the laws of unity, which work for the common good. And they do not want to obey a slave system that does not recognize free thinking and imposes clearly defined rules of behavior and coexistence on everyone. Young rebels, in contrast to adult inhabitants of the planet, distinguish clear signs of a prison in the political system of Ara, among which, by the way, according to the typology of Michel Foucault, there is a real torture for violators of the law, and there is constant supervision of robots and law enforcement officers of the system of a people, which fully embodies the panoptic principle. A totalitarian society with political illusions is also depicted in the science fiction novel The Grey Captain by the Ukrainian writer Volodymyr Vladko, which was published in the final author's version in 1959. The original magazine version of the novel appeared in 1941, and given the historical context of its writing, the plot of the novel is directly marked with propagandist stamps and appropriate accents. For example, one of the main characters is a young Russian, nevertheless has a Ukrainian name or less. Individual episodes of the novel are propaganda of collective struggle under the arms of the communists, etc. The plot of the novel takes place in the fictional Spanish-speaking country of Iberia, which points to Francoist Spain, where the fictional Cordelio Fernandez directly resembles the Cordelio Francisco Franco, the dictator of Spain from 1939 to 1975. So in the end, given historical realities, the allusion to Francisco Franco's Spain was relevant both in 1941 and in post-war 1959. To a certain extent, Volodymyr Vlatko's novel belongs to the genre of political fiction, where on the one hand, totalitarian power is in the hands of one man and his supporters, and on the other, there is a resistance movement which is not homogeneous because it is separately represented by the labor movement, which the writer depicted as ideologically correct, the communist component, as well as the solitary scientist Hernan Ramiro, who operates under the pseudonym Grey Captain. The central fantastic element in the novel is the invention of the Great Captain, the combat vehicle Lucifer, which owes its impregnability to the use of clean atomic energy and anti-gravity technologies. Like the communities on the fictional planets of Stanisław Lem and Les Bernik, Iberia is a totalitarian society, where people who are dangerous to the authorities are isolated in state prisons, subjected to brutal torture there, and exercise total control of a society, both through a single Falangist party and through a developed system of police control and espionage. The Bulgarian-French philosopher Tsvetan Todorov once noted that the depersonalization of people is important for totalitarian practices, in which the victim begins to be considered as a means and function for achieving a political or even cosmic project. As with Lem and Bernik, so with Volodymyr Vlatko, totalitarian systems completely depersonalize individuals. Controlled inhabitants of the planets or the fictional country of Iberia impose new changes in social behavior, isolating them both physically and informationally. Since I have already touched on physical isolation as a typical totalitarian practicable, I should pay special attention to informational isolation. Undoubtedly, the interpretation of the information theory application in a totalitarian state in the novel Eden by Stanisław Lem is fascinating and original. While to maintain his invulnerability after a series of coups d'etat, the next ruler of the planet becomes completely anonymous, and thus the management is supposedly carried out by nobody, and the relevant information comes to the inhabitants from nowhere. Information becomes the main tool for management, and anyone who speaks about the existence of power or the reality of a failed genetic experiment faces severe punishment. Certainly, such a system corresponds to the societies of the Soviet Union or the Polish People's Republic, where the substitution of concepts, a system of ideological simulacra or distortion of reality were commonplace in the condition of struggle, both with one's own population and with the states of the free world. A rather telling allusion to the manipulation of information messages in the Soviet Union is that the team of astronauts were declared hostile aliens threatening the duplexes, but the ship was fast called a meteorite. The same manipulation of information is carried out in Vlatko's novel by the mass media under the control of Cordelia Fernandez. In the novel The Stalker Sir by Bernick, a corresponding information strategy is also carried out. The name of the main rebel in favor of the totalitarian government becomes taboo. It cannot be used, allowed, because this name contains negative connotations. The politics of silence is also inherent in the novel Return from the Stars by Stanisław, where, as the main character finds out, the authorities diligently glorify the genetic experiment, silencing any potential biological deviations and even proposing to introduce a new chronology from the moment of the introduction of betterization. It should be noted the new chronology may be an allusion to the era fascista chronology counted from the march of the National Fascist Party in Rome in 1922. Probably an ambiguous image in the novel by Volodymyr Vlatko is the brilliant scientist great captain who converts his revenge into a fight against the dictator Fernandez and all those who represent his regime. Ukrainian publicist Volodymyr Burban suggested that perhaps the writer reproduces, in the image of the great captain, a model of alienation of the leader from the people, unconsciously looking up to the tyrant Joseph Stalin. However, the writer so often emphasizes the selfish, self-confident, cruel, and narcissistic character of the rebel and Ramiro that it is hardly a manifestation of the unconscious in the text. The writer traces the formation of a new dictator in the image of the scientist, who does not plan to reckon with anyone or anything and who is similar to the dictator Joseph Stalin. At first, outwardly, the writer paints a portrait similar to the one that was spread in millions of copies of various visual propaganda forms. A man in leather jacket stopped in the middle of the room with his hands behind his back. He was of medium height, in boots without a cap. Curly hair fell freely over his high, pale forehead. Among that brown hair there was a large, gray, silver-like strand. The man's clean-shaven face with a large, energetically outlined mouth was calm and confident. Gray eyes under thick, shaggy eyebrows, as if broken at an angle, looked seriously and thoughtfully. Later, Vlatko at least 10 times points out the signs noticed by Ernano friends, acquaintances, and assistants which emphasize the dictatorial style of management and well-view characteristic of the great captain. Such discoveries unpleasantly impress his supporters, even those who are used to the great captain's word being law. The egocentrism in Ramiro's speeches is due to the first successes of his war machine against the dictatorial armed forces, and confident of his invincibility, he demands blind obedience. Among his closest assistants, he has already created a personality cult. When his orders are not discussed and are not subject to any doubt, and his right hand, Volento Claudio, unconditionally bows before the great captain, recognizing in him a strange Superman strength. Volodymyr Vlatko does not end his text with the victory of the inventor or the underground movement over the dictatorship. However, the novel text is a consistent criticism of the dictator, who does not define clear goals for the good of his people, but instead is willing to easily sacrifice civilians for his revenge. So, as the study texts literary allusions to totalitarian states, primarily communist USSR or socialist Polish People's Republic. I will use the typology of the French political scientist Alain Besançon from his well-known work, The Evil Century, on communism, Nazism, and the uniqueness of the Holocaust, for the appropriate conclusion. Thus, he attributes the defining features of the formed totalitarian communist society: keeping the population under lock and key, control over information, and replacing reality with pseudo-reality. The fantasy worlds of Stanisław Lem, Les Bernik, and Volodymyr Lotko in the analyzed novels typologically completely coincide with this triad. Having various traumatic experiences of experiencing totalitarian dictatorships, the writers similarly see the main threats of keeping the population under the cap of lies, from information filtering to purification of the population from untrustworthy individuals. The genre of this report imposes its limitations on the presentation of the material. In my presentation, I have focused only on some novels by Stanisław Lem, Les Bernik, and Volodymyr Lotko. But it seems that the theme of representation of trauma, memory, and resistance to totalitarianism is also present in their other texts, which requires appropriate further research. If you have any questions, please contact me by mail. You can see. And I would like to thank the Wirth Institute for Austrian and Central European Studies, which sponsored the project, the research project. Thank you for your attention.